In 1996, an unknown South African named Charlize Theron was cast as a femme fatale named Helga in the neo-noir 2 Days in the Valley. Theron's first major film role, 2 Days in the Valley, received mixed reviews and was forgotten by all but her most ardent fans. But for Theron, it is a landmark film. It contains the future action star's first fight scene. While Helga here isn't exactly an action hero, her fight is surprisingly brutal. But it's nothing compared to what would come next for Theron. Charlize Theron has been acting for almost my entire life. She's only a little over a decade older than me, but can't remember a time where she wasn't around. I think it's that way for a lot of celebrities that are older than you. They become sort of cultural scenery, the fabric of Hollywood. From That Thing You Do to Devil's Advocate, Mighty Joe Young, The Cider House Rules, and The Legend of Bagger Vance, to a 90s child like myself, she was a recognizable, if not nameable, actress that I knew more from trailers and commercials than her films themselves. That is, until The Italian Job. The Italian Job stars Mark Wahlberg as a leader of a veteran team of thieves, including Theron, the daughter of a master safecracker. As an adolescent boy in 2003, The Italian Job was Theron's first film that I paid any real attention to. Though it wasn't because of Theron, or Wahlberg for that matter. Seth Green was the biggest star of the film for me, as I was a big fan of Austin Powers and Idle Hands, but I digress. Watching The Italian Job today, I recognize how big a role it was for Theron. Before this, she mostly played wives and girlfriends to various protagonists, but here, she's an important character in her own right. Theron is a safecracker, the daughter of Wahlberg's mentor, and yes, ultimately his girlfriend. But she gets to do all the things the boys on the team get to do, including drive. I don't think her role required incredible stretching of her dramatic talents, but we do get to see a new side of her, or at least a side we haven't seen from her since that fight in 2 Days in the Valley. In December of 2003, we saw what would probably be Theron's most important and risky performance. Talk about seeing a new side of her. Theron's portrayal of Eileen Wuornos was transformative and shocking, particularly so for Theron, who was so often cast as a blonde beauty. Here she portrays a sympathetic serial killer who lashes out at the men she perceives have wronged her. In some cases, they certainly have, in others not so much. But society in general has done wrong by her undoubtedly. This is the first film that, perhaps controversially, I can say Theron plays a badass. It's messed up, but Theron's version of the character, which plays fast and loose with the facts, as I understand them, fights and kills men who would hurt her. She stands up for herself in a way that women aren't supposed to, but men are expected to. Yeah, she's not a nice person.
'Cause I want to take your car. Fucking think I'm stupid enough to get back into a fucking car with you when there's a...
She kills people who don't deserve to be killed, but if you take the plunge and identify with her and her struggle, I'll be damned if you aren't rooting for her to shoot the next man who touches her the wrong way. Monster gave Theron an Academy Award, and it opened a lot of doors for her. One of those doors was Eonflux. I credit Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity in The Matrix for starting a new trend of female-led action films, like Charlie's Angels in 2000, Lara Croft Tomb Raider in 2001, Resident Evil in 2002, and Underworld and Kill Bill in 2003. It only makes sense that a newly minted badass like Charlize Theron would throw her hat into the action film ring. Like every other female-led action film of the early aughts, Eonflux features a beautiful woman in tight leather shooting and kicking her way through dozens of enemies. But Eonflux did stand out in some significant ways. First, it was based on a highly regarded experimental animated series with a cult following. Second, it was directed by a woman, the venerable Karin Kusama. It was thought that perhaps this film would have a depth or intelligence uncommon to the genre. Well, not so much. The character of Eon is sexualized in sometimes fun, sometimes strange ways. The camera lingering on her flesh in moments of anxiety and trauma, creating a feeling of voyeurism instead of identification with the character. But what about the action? Well, it's choppy, highly edited in the Jason Bourne style, a lot of quick cuts and edits so the actors don't have to learn too much choreography, but it's not terrible. A PG-13 rating keeps this from getting too brutal, but Eon does snap a lot of necks, sometimes in unorthodox ways. Eonflux has plenty of action, but the film gets caught up in its world building and spends too much time developing a relationship between Eon and her soulmate from a past life and current dictator of her Orwellian police state. It's about as relatable as you imagine. Eonflux bombed, not just because it wasn't very good. There are many, many not very good movies that do well, but because it tried to be different, stranger and grander than other films in the genre. That was supposed to be the film's strength, remember? But it didn't connect with audiences, and Charlize Theron was told that it was because it was a female-led action film.
It was just hard, and I remember the film not really, didn't play as well as everybody thought. And there was just this moment in my career where I realized very clearly that because that movie didn't really perform, that I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't going to be given another opportunity. And it was really harsh. It was like, no, women can't make these movies successful.
A blatant lie, of course. Just look at the success of the contemporaneous Resident Evil and Underworld franchises. Theron wouldn't play an action hero for another decade, but when she did, it would be in the greatest action film of all time. It's impossible to convey how incredible I think Mad Max Fury Road is. It gets better every single time I watch it, and if there's any way you haven't seen it yet, I need you to stop what you're doing, make a mental note, then continue watching this video. Max Rokitansky is ostensibly the lead of Fury Road, but much like Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby, the film isn't really about him. Max gets kidnapped and forced to play a part in another person's story, Imperator Furiosa, a one-armed woman with a mysterious past who betrays her ruler, Immortan Joe, liberates his slave wives, steals his war rig, and leads him on a 3-day battle on wheels. Like Eon, Furiosa is stoic, reserved, mysterious, but she sure as hell doesn't have time for romance. Not with her dictator, Immortan Joe, and not with Max either. Furiosa and Max are thrown together, unlikely allies that, were it not for their equal strength and the fallibility of guns, might have killed each other before they even got to know each other. But their goals quickly align, and within only a couple of days they form a bond built on mutual respect that feels entirely believable. Furiosa does her fair share of shooting, but the role also harkens back to Theron's driving days in The Italian Job. But instead of 180-degree turns in a Mini Cooper, she's slamming through dune buggies in a souped-up big rig. Emboldened by Fury Road's success, Theron discarded the silly notion that a woman can't lead a successful action film. She began principal photography on Atomic Blonde mere months after its release. With the acquisition of veteran stunt coordinator David Leitch in the director's chair, fresh off the first John Wick film, Atomic Blonde was clearly taking its action seriously, and the proof is in the pudding. MI6 agent Lorraine Houghton is, again, a stoic and tough individual, but differentiates herself from the rest of Theron's heroines by having a wry sense of humor and an alcohol problem. 2 sequences in the film stand out to me. The first has Lorraine surprised by a half-dozen KGB agents in the upstairs apartment of a deceased fellow agent. She subdues her enemies and makes her escape with nothing but an extension cord, and it's up there with some of the best Jackie Chan environmental improvisation scenes I've ever seen. Later, in the most iconic sequence of the film, Lorraine has to fight her way through a dozen more KGB agents down a staircase. The fight is 7 minutes long, and you can feel the exhaustion and desperation coursing through Theron and her opponents. One of the most interesting things about the fight choreography in Atomic Blonde is how it pays close attention to how a woman the size of Charlize Theron would fight. Female fighting styles aren't new. Even going back to Eonflux, we can see a sort of feminine style. Eonflux seems less realistic. In Atomic Blonde, Theron convinces you that this woman can take down men more than twice her size. She does it not by overpowering them, but with speed and precision, with brutality and without compassion. She uses her stiletto heel as a weapon, and it doesn't feel like some parody of how women fight, like, oh, she's fighting with her shoes. Or maybe it could, until she ruptures his windpipe. Later, Lorraine uses her keys held in her fist to defend herself like a lot of women are taught to. Her fights never come easy, but they feel all the more convincing for it. The film suffers from a somewhat dull flashback narrative and a few uninteresting twists and turns. One of the film's biggest issues is the lack of any sort of compelling villain. Who is the big bad for Lorraine to be pit against? The problem is that the film's greatest strength is its fight scenes, but the plot of the film is centered around a dull spy story. Atomic Blonde is functionally a James Bond knockoff, and the best part of any James Bond movie is its villain. Dr. No, Goldfinger, Octopussy. The villain in Atomic Blonde is ostensibly the high-ranking Russian agent Bremovich, but he's only defeated in a coda to the film, an afterthought. A more consequential opponent is some nameless blonde Russian that Lorraine fights a couple times. This guy actually beats her in their first fight at the movie theater. Narratively, that makes no goddamn sense. Imagine if Bond got his ass kicked by some random Spectre agent. Wouldn't you want to know who that guy was? Nah, not important, I guess. Atomic Blonde made a tidy profit off its $30 million budget, and Atomic Blonde 2 is currently in production as a Netflix exclusive, making it her second major franchise to be exclusive to the streaming giant. The Old Guard stars Charlize Theron as Andy, or Andromache of Scythia, an ancient immortal leading a team of other immortals who defend humanity from the forces of evil or something. When Andy is betrayed by one of her own, she and newly minted immortal Niall Freeman have to save their team from the evil pharma bro villain Stephen Merrick. The Old Guard has a sci-fi premise similar to Eonflux, the combat focus of Atomic Blonde, and a large cast of characters, including dual protagonists, similar to Fury Road, but it somehow is less interesting than any of those films. The Old Guard really wants us to think that Andy is a badass. She wears all black, sunglasses, cool haircut. We're told she's the leader of the best, an immortal warrior wielding a battle axe, dispatching foes with John Wickian ease. But she's lacking any sort of compelling motivation. Compare that to Furiosa, who's a highly motivated woman with a crystal clear goal. Liberate the wives of Immortan Joe, escape the Citadel, and evade his army. In the Old Guard, Andy wants to defend the innocent, make the world a better place, save her friends. Lofty goals, but vague. Like Aeon Flux, the Old Guard gets bogged down in world building, pointlessly expositing upon Andy's past to set up the inevitable sequel. Just make it a TV series, guys. Furiosa is joined by Mad Max, and Andy, Niall, the American soldier. In both films, the protagonists spend their first few scenes fighting with one another before joining forces. This is a pretty tricky thing to write. A protagonist drives the story forward. It's someone we must be emotionally invested in. Adding a second protagonist requires a second emotional investment, when having us care about a single character is hard enough. Fury Road director George Miller uses the characters of Max and Furiosa synergistically. After they meet, they spend virtually every scene together, building up each other's character through action and dialogue. Andy and Niall do spend a lot of time together, but with much of it, Niall is acting as an audience surrogate for Andy and the other immortals to exposit upon. She never becomes much of a character in her own right. She gets less personality and backstory than 5 other characters in the film, including one who just appears in flashback. Yet she's expected to drive the story in the third act. It just doesn't work. Furthermore, while the fight scenes are all pretty good, if not Atomic Blonde level, we're still denied a great villain for Andy to overcome. Yes, the farmer bro is campy and over the top, but he doesn't fight. He's not a combatant. And so, when he's facing Andy down, his defeat is a fait accompli. He couldn't possibly win. Andy's biggest fight in the third act is against another goddamn anonymous soldier she meets in a hallway. We have no idea who he is, but he gives Andy a run for her money, just like that other guy in Atomic Blonde. Sidebar real quick. You can have the coolest stunts, the most brutal CGI, greatest cinematography, but if I don't care about who's fighting or what they're fighting about, then it all amounts to nothing. It's the writing that differentiates an action film from a stunt reel. Alright, let's have some fun. Let's go to the numbers. I've examined Charlize Theron's 4 action hero roles: Eonflux and Eonflux, Furiosa and Mad Max Fury Road, Lorraine Broughton in Atomic Blonde, and Andy in The Old Guard. And I've derived what I call fight data to see if I can find any interesting trends in the films. Here are my results. Eon defeats the greatest number of opponents with a total of 38. But Andy is very close with 35 opponents. Andy is the most lethal character. She kills 69% of the enemies she faces. That number increases if you factor in enemies that Andy fought that were then killed by one of her allies, which I did not include as a kill for Andy. Eon actually has the least lethal score, with a mere 26% of enemies killed. This number is in some dispute though, as many of her enemies were killed via wild machine pistol blasting. But since I could not determine where the enemies were hit, I couldn't confirm the kill, and I cannot in good conscience just assume they died. Sorry, Eon, but you come in fourth here. And this leads to an interesting trend. As Charlize Theron gets older, her characters have become increasingly lethal. Lorraine both gives and receives the most hits of the quartet by far, but as a ratio, it is Andy who is the most dominant fighter, delivering 9 blows for every 1 she receives. While that may be to her credit in a who would win in a fight argument, I actually think that it's more interesting when a character is not invulnerable, when she takes hits and struggles to win a fight. I suppose it's more relatable. And the best character among the 4, Furiosa, has the smallest ratio. Firearms are definitely the most common weapon used by Charlize Theron in her action roles.
Don't breathe.
They are the number 1 weapon in Eonflux and Fury Road, and the number 2 weapon in Atomic Blonde in the Old Guard. Something that struck me as interesting is that kicks are far more prevalent in Eonflux than any of the other 4 films. Kicks made up 17% of her hits in Eonflux, and that drops down to 10% in Fury Road, 7% in Atomic Blonde, and a mere 2% in the Old Guard. That about finishes off my video, but because I spent too much time collecting this data, allow me to read off every move I wrote down from the movies. In Eonflux, 18 gunshots, 10 kicks, 1 flying kick, 4 stabs with a glass shard, 1 slash with a glass shard, 3 punches, 3 knees, 1 elbow, 3 takedowns, 3 grenades, 2 throwing knives, 2 slams, 2 chokes, 2 disarms, 1 throat chop, 1 vine whip takedown, 1 takedown neck snap, 1 rifle strike, 1 pin, 1 neck snap via crotch, 1 clothesline, 1 arm lock, 1 earring rip, and 1 scientific gas instrument impalement. In Mad Max Fury Road, Furiosa used 9 gunshots, 2 explosive crossbow shots, 1 flare gun shot, 6 war rig slams, 1 war rig trample, 4 kicks, 4 pump hose strikes, 3 disarms, 1 punch, 1 tackle, 1 pistol whip, 1 knife throw, 1 headbutt, 1 elbow, 1 choke, 1 explosive spear, and 1 chaining the face of your enemy to a spinning wheel, causing it to rip off. Maneuver. In Atomic Blonde, Lorraine used 24 gunshots, 17 punches, 12 takedowns, 10 kicks, 9 disarms, 8 pistol whips, 6 knife stabs, 5 corkscrew stabs, 1 car key stab, 6 elbow strikes, 6 club strikes, 4 stiletto heel strikes, 4 extension cord whips, 1 extension cord counterweight slam, 3 portable stove strikes, 3 gunstock strikes, 2 pot strikes, 2 ladder strikes, 2 palm strikes, 2 chokes, 1 knee, 1 knife slash, 1 bullet wound press, 1 lamp strike, 1 freezer door strike, 1 shelving unit strike, 1 car hit, and 1 purposeful car crash. In the Old Guard, Andy used 24 gunshots, 12 axe slices, 6 axe chops, 1 axe stab, 5 sword slashes, 1 sword stab, 1 360-degree sword slash, 3 knife stabs, 1 knife slash, 6 punches, 6 takedowns, 5 arm locks, 4 slams, 3 pistol whips, 2 kicks, 2 disarms, 2 hand chops, 2 baton strikes, 1 table slam, 1 knee, 1 elbow, and 1 wicked arm break.
I said we're done.
Cut. That's it. That'll do it.